In the world of evolution, bigger is usually better. More muscle, more height, more power. It's the oldest rule in the book. Dominate the competition, pass on your genes, win the game. But about 10,000 years ago, a player entered the evolutionary arena who took this logic to an absolute breaking point. Meet Megaloceros giganteus, the Irish elk. This creature carried a 12-foot wide crown of bone on its head. 12 feet wide. To put that in perspective, that's wider than most cars. It looked like royalty. It looked invincible. It looked like it had absolutely conquered the meta. But in reality, it was a walking mechanical failure, a biological contradiction, and one of evolution's most spectacular overinvestments. Today, we're cracking open the case file on the most overpowered mistake in natural history. This is the story of how you can win every battle and still lose the war. Let's start at the crime scene. For over a century, paleontologists were absolutely baffled by the Irish elk. Here was an animal that seemed perfectly adapted for survival, massive, powerful, and equipped with the most impressive display structures in mammalian history. And yet, it vanished. Around 7,700 years ago, the last Irish elk took its final breath, and an entire lineage disappeared from Earth. The official theory? The one you'll find in old textbooks and museum placards? Entanglement. The argument went like this. These giants evolved antlers so absurdly oversized that they became their own worst enemy. Picture it. You're walking through a dense post-Ice Age forest, and your antlers span 12 feet from tip to tip. You turn your head to browse on some leaves, and suddenly you're caught. Branches snag in the tines. You pull back, but you're stuck. You thrash. You panic. And eventually, you starve, trapped by your own evolutionary excess. It sounds perfectly logical, right? If you're 12 feet wide, you can't exactly navigate tight spaces. You can't sneak through underbrush. You can't escape predators by ducking into cover. You're a walking billboard that says, I am here, and I am massive, and I physically cannot hide. But here's where the official narrative starts to crack. When modern researchers actually examined the environment where these animals lived, they found something interesting. The Irish elk wasn't primarily a forest dweller. Isotope analysis of their teeth, which records the chemical signature of the plants they ate, revealed that these animals were grazers of open plains and parklands. They lived in habitats more similar to African savannas than dense European forests. They were built for visibility, not camouflage. They were masters of the open field. So if they weren't getting tangled in trees, if they weren't bumbling around in forests like a teenager trying to parallel park, then what actually killed them? That's where we need to shift our investigation. Because the real crime here wasn't mechanical failure. It was economic collapse. Let's break down the build. When you look at the Irish elk from a game design perspective, you start to see the problem immediately. This animal put 100% of its evolutionary skill points into exactly two stats: intimidation and sexual selection. Those antlers, they weren't weapons. They were billboards. They were peacock tails made of bone. Male Irish elk used those massive racks to advertise their genetic quality to females. The logic of sexual selection is simple. If you can survive while carrying 90 pounds of bone on your head, you must have good genes. You must be strong. You must have access to resources. So females preferentially mate with the males who have the biggest, most symmetrical, most absurd antlers. And over thousands of generations, this creates a runaway feedback loop. Bigger antlers mean more mates. More mates mean more offspring. More offspring with genes for bigger antlers. Repeat, repeat, repeat. But here's the glitch in the system. Here's where the build becomes unsustainable. Bone isn't free. It's not just something your body conjures out of thin air. Bone is made of calcium phosphate, and that means to build antlers of this scale, You need a truly massive intake of minerals. But here's the kicker. Irish elk antlers were deciduous. That means they fell off and regrew every single year. Every year, the male had to reconstruct 90 pounds of bone from scratch. To do that, the body would start cannibalizing its own skeleton. It would strip calcium and phosphate from the ribs, the vertebrae, the leg bones, anywhere it could find reserves. Essentially, the Irish elk was dissolving its own structural integrity to maintain its display. It was like taking out a payday loan from your own skeleton. And it wasn't just minerals. Those antlers required energy, protein. The Irish elk needed access to high-quality forage, plants rich in nutrients, minerals, and digestible energy. Specifically, they needed environments with calcium-rich vegetation, which typically grows in areas with fertile soil and stable climates. This is what we call a high-maintenance build. It's the biological equivalent of buying a supercar that gets 8 miles to the gallon and requires premium fuel. Sure, it looks incredible. Sure, everyone turns their head when you drive by. But can you actually afford to run it? Compare this to other herbivores of the same era. Red deer, for example, also have antlers, but they're proportional, manageable. They can regrow them without bankrupting their mineral reserves. They're playing the budget meta. They're not trying to flex on everyone. They're just trying to survive and reproduce. And guess what? Red deer are still around today. They survived the same climate shifts that killed the Irish elk because they didn't overinvest in a single non-essential trait. The Irish elk, on the other hand, locked itself into a strategy with zero flexibility. It couldn't downsize. It couldn't pivot. Evolution doesn't have a refund button. Once you're committed to a build, you're stuck with it until either the environment rewards you or it kills you. So what actually happened? What was the patch that broke the Irish elk's build? The answer is simple, and it's brutal. The climate changed, and the resource economy collapsed. Around 11,700 years ago, the Earth exited the last ice age and entered the Holocene. This wasn't a gradual, gentle warming. It was a rapid, chaotic shift. Within the span of a few centuries, practically overnight in geological terms, the planet's ecosystems were completely reorganized. In Europe, the open grasslands and tundra that the Irish elk depended on began to disappear. Forests started to expand. The types of plants that thrived in the new climate were different, lower in minerals, higher in tough cellulose, harder to digest. The nutrient-rich, calcium-heavy vegetation that the elk needed to fuel its antler growth simply vanished from the landscape. And this is where the elk's over-specialization became a death sentence. It couldn't just eat anything. It couldn't adapt to lower-quality forage like smaller, more generalist herbivores could. Its entire biology was calibrated for a high-input, high-reward strategy, and when the inputs disappeared, the system collapsed. Imagine you're running a business that requires $100,000 a month in operating costs. You've got a fancy office, a huge staff, premium equipment, and then suddenly your revenue drops to $30,000 a month. You can't just scale down instantly. You've got leases, contracts, overhead. You're locked in. That's what happened to the Irish elk. It was locked into a biological business model that required resources the environment could no longer provide. But it wasn't just the plants. There was another factor, one that we can't ignore: human beings. As the climate warmed, humans spread further into Europe. And humans are persistence hunters, tool users, and ecological disruptors. Even if the Irish elk could have survived the resource crunch, it now had to contend with an invasive species that hunted in coordinated groups, used projectile weapons, and had no interest in playing fair. Some researchers believe that hunting pressure was the final nail in the coffin. Others argue that humans just accelerated a process that was already underway. Either way, the result was the same. By around 7,700 years ago, the last Irish elk was gone. The build had been patched out of the game,